What if the earliest humans, millions of years before any known religion, already felt something moving inside them, something they could not name but could never ignore? Imagine a world where the night was absolute, where every sound carried the possibility of danger, and yet, in that same darkness, a strange sense of presence began to grow. This was not belief as we know it today. It was a raw and instinctive awareness, a first spark of faith forming in minds that were still learning to understand themselves. Long before rituals, myths, or spiritual leaders, there was only the silent question rising inside primitive consciousness. Something watches, something guides, something out there never sleeps. This early intuition became one of the most powerful forces shaping human evolution, influencing decisions, migrations, protection strategies, and the way small groups stayed united in a brutal environment. The spirit they felt was not a doctrine, but a survival instinct, transformed into meaning. Their very ability to imagine unseen forces may have been the first step toward symbolic thinking, cooperation, and the emotional bonds that kept their fragile tribes alive. And as their sense of danger grew, so did their sense of something greater walking beside them in ways they could not explain. You may have felt this too at some point in your own life, a moment when logic fades and something deeper whispers that you are not facing everything alone. Have you ever wondered why this feeling seems older than humanity itself, or why people across the world describe similar sensations even today? You might discover that the instincts of those ancient ancestors still echo inside you, shaping emotions you thought were yours alone. And if this resonates with you, share your experience in the comments, leave your like to strengthen this journey, and check if you are already subscribed so you do not miss the unfolding of what comes next, as the path that begins. Here continues to reveal how the spirit that never slept shaped the earliest steps of our species toward meaning and survival. As the first humans moved through vast prehistoric landscapes, their awareness of invisible signs in nature grew sharper with each generation. They did not simply observe the world, they interpreted it through an instinctive lens shaped by survival and an emerging spiritual sensitivity. Every shift in the wind carried meaning. Every rustle in the tall grass demanded attention. These early ancestors lived in a constant dialogue with their environment, reading patterns long before they developed structured language. The earth itself seemed to communicate with them, urging caution or offering reassurance in subtle ways. A broken branch, a sudden silence among distant animals, a change in the scent of the air, nothing was random. These clues formed a primitive vocabulary that the mind instinctively tried to organize, and as they searched for deeper understanding, these patterns began to feel like messages, as if some hidden force were guiding them. This belief did not arise from imagination alone, but from the practical need to survive in a world where one mistake could cost an entire group their lives. Over countless generations, this sensitivity to nature's rhythms evolved into something more internal. The early humans began to anticipate danger, not only through physical observation, but through an intuitive inner pulse, a feeling that something unseen was moving around them. Modern science might call it heightened awareness or early cognition, but to them, it felt like the presence of a watching spirit that communicated through signs scattered across the land. These perceptions shaped how they traveled, hunted, sheltered their children, and chose safe territories. Their spiritual awareness developed alongside their physical abilities, becoming an essential tool for interpreting a world full of threats and mysteries. And with each new challenge they faced, this sense of guidance seemed to grow stronger, as if the invisible signs were slowly teaching them how to understand the environment and their place within it. This ongoing internal dialogue between human instinct and natural signals became one of the earliest forms of faith, long before rituals or spoken myths could define it. It created a silent connection that would continue to evolve as their consciousness expanded, preparing them for even deeper layers of meaning that were beginning to take shape around them. As these early perceptions deepened, the boundary between fear and spiritual awareness became almost indistinguishable. For the first humans, fear was not merely an emotion, it was a constant companion shaped by predators, darkness, hunger, and isolation. Yet, within this fear, something unexpected emerged. Instead of being paralyzed by danger, early humans began transforming their fear into patterns of meaning. When storms raged across the sky or when shadows moved unpredictably at night, they sensed more than threat. They felt the presence of forces they could not see, yet believed were influencing their survival. Fear created an inner space where imagination and instinct merged, allowing the earliest rituals to take shape long before any structured belief system existed. A whisper in the darkness became a sign. A flash of lightning became a message. A sudden intuition before a hunt felt like guidance from something beyond themselves. This merging of fear and meaning helped shape the emotional core of early spirituality. As groups gathered around firelight, they shared the sensations that had stirred inside them during the day or in the long hours of the night. Even without language, their gestures, expressions, and reactions communicated something powerful. They were beginning to recognize that fear could lead to wisdom, that danger could reveal patterns, and that responding to these patterns united the group. Over time, these shared experiences created a primitive form of emotional bonding, strengthening cooperation and allowing them to survive challenges they could never face alone. The fear that once isolated individuals now became a collective force, guiding decisions and shaping behaviors that appeared almost ritualistic. Through this evolving inner landscape, the human mind started to shift. The earliest spiritual impulses were not born out of comfort or abundance. They were shaped in the harshest conditions of prehistory. Each dangerous encounter left an imprint that the mind tried to make sense of. In this constant search for meaning within fear, the seeds of symbolic thinking began to grow, eventually becoming the foundation for imagination, storytelling, and belief. And as these early humans continued to interpret the world through this emerging inner lens, the sense that they were not alone became stronger, pulling them closer to the mysterious presence they felt moving around them, preparing their consciousness for deeper encounters that were still unfolding in the night. As the nights stretched endlessly across prehistoric landscapes, something profound began to awaken within the minds of early humans. The darkness, once a place of pure terror, gradually transformed into a realm filled with meaning. When the fire burned low and silence surrounded their fragile shelters, the first symbolic thoughts stirred like quiet embers. Shadows danced against cave walls, and these moving shapes triggered connections that had never existed before. Early humans were not simply reacting to their environment, they were beginning to interpret it through an inner world that felt alive. The night became a bridge between external threats and internal visions, giving birth to the earliest forms of spiritual reflection. In that vast silence, the mind learned to weave patterns, linking memories, sensations, and emotions in ways that hinted at something larger than survival. These moments, fleeting yet powerful, shaped the first steps toward a symbolic consciousness that would one day allow myths, stories, and spiritual traditions to emerge. As their minds evolved, these nighttime impressions deepened. A distant howl or a flicker of light became more than sensory input. It became a message waiting to be understood. In the stillness, they felt their ancestors close, sensed presences that guided them, and believed that unseen forces moved in harmony with their lives. The night revealed not only danger, but also protection, as if something beyond their senses watched over them. This growing perception created a new layer of emotional bonding within the group. When one individual sensed a threat or felt a warning from the shadows, the others responded instinctively. These shared reactions were subtle yet transformative, shaping a collective intuition that strengthened their unity. Through countless experiences like these, symbolic thinking became essential, not optional. It helped them understand the rhythms of the world and navigate the challenges that threatened their survival. Slowly, the night became a sacred teacher, offering insights that no spoken language could express. And as early humans gazed into the darkness, they felt a connection that stretched beyond themselves, something that would later evolve into the spiritual frameworks we know today. These first whispers of meaning continued to grow, guiding their steps as they explored deeper layers of intuition and possibility, sensing that each night carried a message waiting to be discovered. If something in this resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what part of this awakening you feel most connected to, and let your voice join the reflection that began millions of years ago. As these early humans continued shaping meaning from their encounters with the world, something even more remarkable emerged: the transmission of spiritual perception across generations long before structured language existed. Knowledge did not pass through words, but through actions, gestures, rhythms of movement, and the emotional resonance of shared experience. A child observing an elder pause before entering a dark forest understood that silence carried significance. A group changing direction after sensing a shift in the wind internalized the idea that nature communicated warnings. These subtle signals formed the foundation of a spiritual inheritance that needed no vocabulary. It flowed through instinct and observation, shaping young minds from their earliest moments. The lessons they absorbed were not taught. They were felt. And because this transmission happened before the development of formal language, it carried a purity that would deeply influence the evolution of human consciousness. As the young watched their elders react to the invisible signs of the world, they began to mirror the same heightened senses. They learned to recognize patterns in animal behavior, cloud formations, and the shapes of shadows at dawn. But they also learned something deeper, the idea that unseen forces influence their lives. This understanding became ingrained through repetition, ritual-like behaviors, and shared emotional states. Over time, these inherited perceptions nurtured new layers of intuition. A child did not need to be told that a certain clearing was unsafe. The tension in the adult's posture communicated everything. These early transmissions functioned as an unspoken spiritual map, guiding decisions, fears, hopes, and expectations. Such intuitive learning created a continuity of belief that stretched through countless generations. It shaped the earliest frameworks of trust, responsibility, and cooperation. The young grew into adults who repeated the same gestures, followed the same instincts, and responded to nature with the same reverence and caution. And through this repetition, spiritual awareness slowly crystallized into something more stable, forming the first foundations of collective meaning. These early humans were not simply surviving, they were creating an emotional legacy that would shape the evolution of humanity's understanding of the sacred. And as this inheritance deepened, their connection to the unseen world grew stronger, preparing them for the powerful transformations that awaited them in the landscapes beyond their familiar territories. In a world where survival was a daily struggle, the forces of nature assumed roles far beyond mere hazards or conveniences. They became guides, teachers, and markers of spiritual understanding. Early humans did not see storms, rivers, or the movements of animals as purely physical phenomena. They sensed them as active participants in the ongoing story of life, forces that could influence fate and offer direction. A sudden shift in wind might signal approaching rain or the presence of predators. The rising sun illuminated paths to safety, while the stars hinted at consistent patterns that repeated across seasons. Over time, these forces were internalized, not as scientific facts but as powerful, almost conscious guides that shaped daily choices. To follow them was to honor a deeper rhythm, to recognize that the world was alive with meaning far beyond human comprehension. These intuitive understandings created the earliest forms of spiritual navigation, a way to move through space and time that relied not on maps or tools, but on attentive perception and a sense of trust in unseen currents. The perception of these natural guides fostered remarkable adaptation. Tribes learned to move with the patterns of prey and predator alike, to seek shelter in alignment with seasonal shifts, and to harvest resources in a rhythm that mirrored the cycles of life around them. The spiritual dimension of these actions was inseparable from survival. Their choices were influenced by a subtle dialogue with forces they could not name, yet whose effects were undeniable. Even the simple act of gathering near a river or climbing to a vantage point carried a ritualistic weight, as if acknowledging the invisible hand that allowed them to exist, even momentarily, without disaster. This recognition formed the basis for symbolic thought, embedding reverence and respect for the unseen into the consciousness of early humans. Over generations, this reliance on environmental forces became a silent teacher, imparting lessons of patience, observation, and attunement to rhythms far larger than any individual could comprehend. As these practices deepened, early humans began connecting environmental guidance with social cohesion. Shared responses to the unseen forces created collective rituals, even if they were not yet formalized as spiritual or religious practices. Cooperation, trust, and mutual protection arose naturally from the recognition that survival depended on aligning with both nature and one another. The primal spirituality that developed in this way was neither codified nor enforced. It was experienced, felt, and passed through example, intuition, and shared vigilance. In embracing these forces as guides, humans discovered the first bridge between the physical world and the inner life, a bridge that would carry them into increasingly complex spiritual and cultural landscapes as their understanding expanded across millennia. In a world dominated by uncertainty, the pursuit of protection became the driving force behind the spiritual awareness of early humans. Every rustle in the underbrush, every distant howl, and every shadow cast by the flickering firelight carried potential threats that could mean life or death. Over time, these dangers shaped not only practical survival strategies, but also a deep, instinctive understanding that unseen forces might provide guidance and defense. Early humans began to sense that certain behaviors, gestures, or rituals could influence outcomes in ways they did not yet fully understand. The act of leaving offerings, moving in specific patterns, or observing the natural signs with careful attention was not superstition. It was a method of aligning with the invisible currents that govern the world around them. Protection became a sacred pursuit, intertwined with intuition, observation, and a growing recognition of spiritual presence that extended beyond immediate perception. This drive for security strengthened social cohesion as well. Groups who moved in harmony with these perceived forces demonstrated greater resilience and unity, while those who ignored such guidance often faced disaster. The rituals and practices that emerged from these instincts were subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but they conveyed messages that bound communities together. Even without language, the careful attention to signs and the sharing of protective knowledge allowed early humans to survive and thrive in environments that would have otherwise been hostile. Each member of the group learned not only to observe but to interpret these subtle cues, passing insights down to younger generations in ways that were both practical and symbolic. In this way, the quest for protection became inseparable from spiritual perception, creating an intricate network of belief, intuition, and action that guided early communities. As the understanding of unseen forces deepened, so did the awareness that some powers were beyond comprehension. The first humans began to feel that certain events were orchestrated by forces that watched, influenced, and responded to their choices. This perception nurtured a kind of primal faith, a conviction that alignment with these energies was essential for survival. And as this consciousness spread through families and tribes, it reinforced collective rituals, strengthened social bonds, and shaped the earliest forms of spiritual life. If you have ever felt the pull of unseen guidance or wondered how ancient peoples interpreted danger and protection, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Share what part of this ancient pursuit resonates most with you and how you imagine those first humans navigating a world where survival and spirituality were inseparably intertwined. As early humans navigated the brutal and unpredictable landscapes of prehistory, the search for meaning became as crucial as the pursuit of survival itself. Each encounter with predators, harsh weather, or scarcity of resources forced them to ask questions that went beyond the immediate. Why do these patterns repeat? Why does this place feel safer than another? These inquiries, though unspoken, sparked the emergence of symbolic thought, turning raw experience into the earliest forms of understanding that the world contained layers beyond the visible. Even without language or formalized rituals, humans began constructing meaning from the chaos surrounding them, recognizing that events were not random but embedded with signals and signs that could be interpreted if observed carefully. This construction of significance allowed them to anticipate challenges, coordinate actions, and build strategies for living that extended beyond instinct alone. Each choice became informed not only by practical necessity, but also by an evolving sense of the sacred. This growing perception of meaning also shaped social behaviors. The recognition that danger, opportunity, and environmental patterns could carry significance reinforced group cohesion and facilitated cooperative strategies. Those who learned to interpret subtle cues in the landscape, patterns in animal movements, shifts in the wind, changes in the color of the sky, had advantages in hunting, gathering, and navigating territory. The collective awareness of these signs became a foundation for early shared knowledge, passed down through observation, gesture, and example. Within this framework, symbolic thinking intertwined with survival, producing behaviors that carried spiritual weight even before the emergence of structured beliefs. Humans began to sense that the world was responsive, that events could be guided or influenced by unseen forces, and that attentiveness could yield both safety and insight. Over time, this cultivation of meaning led to the first expressions of proto-religious thought. Simple practices, repeated movements, or attentiveness to natural signs became early rituals, creating a rhythm that linked humans with the cycles of life and death, abundance and scarcity, fear and triumph. These patterns of interpretation formed a mental scaffolding that allowed for reflection, storytelling, and emotional resonance, preparing minds to expand into more complex spiritual and cultural systems. The construction of meaning in a harsh and unpredictable world became a core aspect of consciousness, a force that shaped cognition, social bonds, and the earliest spiritual frameworks, laying the groundwork for the sophisticated beliefs that would emerge in the millennia to come. As the human mind continued to evolve, the perception of the sacred began to influence collective behaviors in profound ways. Early humans realized that certain actions, observations, and rituals could affect not only immediate survival, but also the well-being of the group as a whole. The understanding that life was intertwined with unseen forces, forces that could guide, warn, or protect, created a shared awareness that shaped social norms and behaviors. Communities that recognized these patterns and responded attentively gained stability, while those that ignored them faced greater risk. The earliest forms of spirituality, therefore, were inseparable from practical wisdom, creating a unique blend of intuition, observation, and symbolic thought that guided daily life. This awareness of the sacred, though primitive, established the foundation for moral reasoning, cooperation, and the social cohesion necessary for enduring the challenges of the prehistoric world. Through repeated experiences and careful observation, humans began to discern that certain elements of the environment carried consistent meanings. Rivers, mountains, celestial patterns, and animal behaviors were not merely features of the landscape. They became indicators of opportunity and danger, carriers of messages that demanded attention. Recognizing and responding to these signs became a form of proto-religious practice, a silent contract, between humans and the natural world that ensured survival. Over generations, these responses solidified into shared knowledge, passed down intuitively from elders to younger members of the group. This transmission created a sense of continuity, linking past, present, and future, and embedding the earliest spiritual lessons into the collective consciousness. Moreover, the perception of the sacred shaped internal experiences, creating a psychological landscape rich with meaning, anticipation, and reverence. Emotions such as awe, fear, gratitude, and hope were interwoven with practical action, reinforcing the connection between the visible and invisible realms. These early humans were not simply reacting to their surroundings, they were learning to interpret a complex web of signals, both external and internal, that guided decisions, reinforced social bonds, and provided a sense of order in a chaotic environment. The awareness of the sacred gradually shaped their culture, cognition, and identity, laying the groundwork for symbolic communication, storytelling, and the eventual emergence of structured beliefs that would define humanity's spiritual heritage. As these perceptions deepened, humans began to understand that the sacred was not just around them, it was within, shaping their thoughts, actions, and sense of community in ways that would echo across millennia. As the millennia unfolded, the early humans' spiritual awareness became inseparable from the very fabric of their lives. The lessons passed down through generations, the patterns observed in nature, and the subtle understanding of unseen forces all coalesced into a profound sense of connection with the world around them. This emerging consciousness allowed humans to navigate the harshest environments, protect their communities, and anticipate dangers with a depth of intuition that was extraordinary for minds still developing the tools of reasoning and language. Every action, every shared experience, and every observation contributed to an evolving spiritual framework that shaped not only survival, but also the capacity for reflection, creativity, and meaning-making. The sacred was no longer abstract, it was intertwined with daily life, guiding choices, relationships, and the understanding of one's place in the universe. This awareness of the unseen fostered cooperation and trust, strengthening the bonds that allowed groups to endure scarcity, predators, and the unpredictability of nature. Early humans learned to interpret celestial patterns, animal movements, seasonal cycles, and environmental cues as indicators of the unseen forces shaping their world. These interpretations, subtle yet profound, laid the foundation for ritualistic behaviors, storytelling, and shared symbolic practices that communicated knowledge across generations. The accumulation of these experiences not only ensured survival, but also cultivated the first complex cognitive structures capable of abstract thought, moral reasoning, and collective imagination. In this way, spirituality and practical knowledge were inseparable, each reinforcing the other, creating a legacy of insight, resilience, and profound connection with forces both visible and invisible. And today, that ancient heritage continues to resonate within us. The instinctive sense that there is more than meets the eye, the awareness of forces that guide and influence life, and the deep emotional understanding of the sacred all trace back to these early humans. If you have followed this journey to the very end, take a moment to reflect on what these lessons from millions of years ago mean to you personally. Leave a comment below with the phrase, "This message was for me," to share your connection with this ancient wisdom. Like the video to honor the journey we have explored together, and if you are not yet subscribed, join the channel to continue uncovering the hidden paths of humanity's earliest spiritual discoveries. There is a video waiting for you that complements this exploration. Click and continue the journey, discovering how the echoes of faith millions of years ago still shape our perception, understanding, and experience of the world today.